How's it going, guys? Nate back with another video. This time I'm going to recap some set champs that I've gotten to play since we are in the midst of Reign of Jafar set championships. And then I'm going to go over some of the decks I've seen, obviously what I've played, and then kind of my overall thoughts on the current meta, what I like and what I don't like about it right now. So that's kind of the plan for this video. So of course, starting out for set champs, we had to play my favorite deck, which is Ruby Amethyst. Ruby Amethyst, right now in its current state, is all about the evasive package. So we've got Maui Shark, we've got Peter Pan, wherever he is, and then we've got a bunch of other different kind of supporting cards, such as actions and different stuff like that. That's pretty standard. The current iteration of this deck that I had been building or playing at the time was more based around the ability to have Ursula Mad Sea Witch, a Diablo, or a Chernobog Flowers on board, and then be able to always crab it. That was kind of the philosophy when I made this deck. So we obviously had Merlin Crab himself, but then we had Yelena Northunder Leader. I had been testing this card a lot on the online simulator we're not allowed to talk about. Um, and I had been feeling very confident in this card actually because it's 2 quester and the Challenger 2 is very relevant a lot of times. Same thing with this Moana. I have been playing her over like Iago, which I've done normally, but this one I really wanted Moana. Once again, she's just another crab type effect. So the idea is that I had felt like Amber Steel was gonna take over the entire meta. I have to be ready to kill a Rhino as soon as possible because if that guy sits there, it's going to be a very difficult time for me. That was the philosophy when I designed this deck. Most of it, the rest of it is pretty standard here. Some people don't like Dragonfire. I'm a big fan of Dragonfire. And then the Hades is very good top end. But the main thing that I was kind of putting in my flex slots were these Yelenas here. Overall, this deck went 2 and 3, or 2. Actually, no, it just went 2-2. Because I dropped the 5th round because my tiebreakers were not seeming very good for me to bubble into top 8, which it looks like I was right based on how that top 8 panned out. Overall, this deck was very solid, but I'm going to go over into some matchups here and kind of explain what sort of happened. So what I ended up playing against first round was the sort of Mufasa style list. This obviously is not my opponent's exact list, especially because it's very noteworthy that this version does not have Maui Shark in it, or Maui's Fishhook. My opponent was very ready for evasive characters. So actually, while I would say that this matchup is very much so normally a slam dunk for any version of Ruby Amethyst evasives, we're definitely looking at a lot of difficulty when it comes to our opponent having a character that can actually stand up to Maui Shark, in that they had their own Maui Sharks as well as some fish hooks. I actually thought that their build was very interesting. It came down to 3 games playing against that style of deck, and ultimately I lost in top deck mode. I had gotten to a point where Hades had sang a Be Prepared, destroyed their board. I played a Maui Shark after that on the same turn. I was in a very good position, I thought, to close out game 3. Then my opponent inked their 9th card and played a Maleficent Dragon, and I was just dead because they were at like 17, and I just drew like a Brawl or something. So obviously very standard Disney lore kind of gameplay. Sometimes variance happens, and you have to be okay with it, right? But overall, I would stand by the opinion that a matchup like Red, Yellow, Mufasa for Ruby and this Evasives, slam dunk, very good matchup. You have a lot of ways to deal with their characters, and it's very hard to deal with your characters because they don't normally have a lot of evasives. So that was noteworthy and good on my opponent there. The next list I played against that I had beat 2-1 was a green purple discard list playing Diablos and the usual kind of evasive characters that they play in that deck, along with like the discard cards. Noteworthy that they got was Pull the Lever and Wrong Lever, so they have an actual shark answer. That said, the matchup, because they're kind of reliant obviously on Diablo Devoted Herald, is really strong for us. Because they lean so heavy on that card, we have Peter Pan Shadowfinder, and brawls and genies and different things to be able to handle a Diablo pretty easy and like pretty easy to be on site, right? So what we're looking at when we have this type of opponent is like the only way that they can beat us is if they kind of go wide or we kind of stumble really badly. I did have a game against that deck where I did stumble quite a bit and I just couldn't find one of my 4 be prepareds, which obviously, once again, variance hits us sometimes. Sometimes you find one, sometimes you find all of them. So, you gotta sort of pick and choose where you go there. Overall, though, despite going only 2-1 against this deck, I once again, I feel like you're very happy if you are playing Ruby Amethyst Evasives to play against this. Most people kind of generally agree with me. It's just a very strong matchup because they have a lot of trouble dealing with the amount of evasive characters you have, and then eventually you just win the game with like sticking a shark or something. Overall, another great matchup. Pretty understandable why I won it. The next matchup was against Amber Steel Aggro. This one was one I was very interested in because I was obviously very heavily tech to beat this style of deck. And I did get to 2-0 this player. The biggest things that I felt were one, just my ability to control the board is really, really strong. Uh, they had some rough draws, I would say, but there was also just like they won the die roll even. So I was just in a very good position throughout the whole match, and I never felt uncomfortable. Sometimes when you play against aggro, you're like, am I gonna have to eke this out with some pirates' lives? Does a Pete ruin my life? And they just were never able to actually proper establish board. Once again, as with all the lists that I'm showing for decks that my opponents played, but they're not exact same lists, right? So he had some interesting stuff. He had Jafar that like gives Challenger 2, and he was still playing Ariel in his deck too, which I thought was interesting just to find those base level songs. So kind of a mix of Steel Song and Amber Steel Aggro, but overall I was very comfortable against that deck. So that's not much said there. I really teched heavy into it, so I was glad that my tech worked out well for me. And then finally, what I ended up playing against was a blue-red shark build, and this took me from 2-1 to 2-2. So I was in a rough position after that. But basically, what they had was they had this Sisu, which I actually found interesting because I'll talk about this deck in a minute. I actually played this version right here the day after, so I'll get into that in a little bit here. But they were playing this Sisu, which actually netted them quite a bit of card advantage. Um, they were playing the Merlin's Carpetbag, which that card alone was able to get them beyond me in card advantage like no other. I had Finders Keepers, I had done as much as I could. This card being able to draw them most of their deck just over the course of turns was very strong and not to be underrated, especially if you're like looking for really good tech against Ruby Amethyst in this style of deck. This card is very, very strong. Highly recommend that. Overall, I did get 0-2'd this match, so it was one of those ones where like I kind of felt like I was a little unlucky, but I didn't really feel like it was that much luck. I actually felt like it was more along the lines of my tech spots were used for these Yelenas, and I find that this card is not very good in a situation where you're just trying to play for fatigue. If I really wanted to, I would probably play like more libraries, which I almost got a win in one of the matchups just because of the library, but my opponent saved their hideaway quite well and were able to get rid of it and made it very difficult for me to win. So like if I was teching for red blue, I'd play more libraries, maybe more Pirate's Life, maybe another Finders Keepers even, which I've seen some people run 3. Uh, and I definitely just wouldn't play these Yelenas. And in my future builds, I don't think that this card's going to be in the deck. So overall, this deck, it went 2-2. I dropped because we were about an hour away from our place, and I could read the writing on the wall that I was not going to be able to bubble into top 8 based on the people I had played, beat, and lost against. So I just thought I'm not in a position to do it, and I think I was right because my friend actually did bubble into top 8 with a 3-2, and I think his record was more so because he had played against people who had done better that day. Long story short, this deck the core is very strong. Obviously very strong, no issues here. I don't think I would play this card because I think it is too much leaning into one specific matchup in a field that is very, very wide right now. There's a lot of things going on that make this card not as good as you would like. Sometimes it surprised me over the course of me testing it, where I was like, oh, these two lore is like actually really, really strong. But overall, I would rather have some different cards in this position. Um, but still a solid list if you want to give it a try. I would maybe try either Cusco's, another Maui, you could play another Brawl. So now to go over the next set champs I played, where I did go 2-3 once again. Just missing all those Jafar tops, I guess. But anyways, my existential crisis aside, we played Red Blue Shark. I played against this the day before and had just thought, man, that does get a lot of card advantage. It seems kind of fun to play. Let's give something like that a shot and see how we overall do. The core of this deck, still playing Shark just like I like to do with Ruby Amethyst, but we've got a bigger toolbox here because we've got things like Hideaway, Develop Your Brain, we got Ramp with Sail, Vision, How Far I'll Go, all these different cards. And also, I saw how dirty I was done with Merlin's Carpetbag, and I'm like, I gotta try this out. This seems very good and very strong. Overall, I would say the deck, which I've always known it to be from people talking about it, is very difficult decision wise. I would say if there's one deck that my decisions maybe lost me games more so than just like rough variants, it might be this Shark list. There's a lot of choices you have to make in this deck because you get to see so many cards between your mulligan, between the cards you're drawing for turn, different things like your vision of the future, develop your brand, how far I'll go. These are all multiple card decisions that you have to make in a moment on a turn to be like, I need this right now. Now, I do think that this deck is very interesting in that, like, you would think it grinds really well, actually, surprisingly, but it doesn't always. Like, your main grind tool is, like, Carpetbag, actually. But otherwise, which I've always heard about this sort of DKP style deck, is that you want to protect the mana and ride it to victory. And that's how it seemed in my games when I played with it. So now I'm going to go over a little bit more of what I actually played against and how I felt during the matchup. So the first deck I played against was something actually more a little bit along these lines of a green or red yellow sensor core deck, which obviously very fun style deck, but theoretically you would think should be kind of a slam dunk for this sort of blue red, like very meta, very strong card deck. And while I did win my games with this person, it was definitely closer than I thought. One of the biggest noteworthy things about this style of matchup was that my opponent had laid more than one sensor core in all three of our games, actually. So if you can't immediately deal with like a random character such as a Mulan, a Queen, or whatever, then all of a sudden if they have two sensor cores out, that's like playing against a manner that you can't attack into. And so then you're really hoping that you draw one of these like hideaways over here. But what ended up happening was basically I was eventually able to finally control them, and then they kind of missed out on draws, drawing some of their actions, some of their things not off of sensor core, and I was able to ride manners to victory. This is actually the matchup that I would say was the epitome of set a manner, kill anything that gets in your way, and hope that the manner gets you to victory. And that's where we got. But I had surprisingly close games against this style of deck, which I found quite interesting. And my opponent, very nice person, so can't complain there. But yeah, not like I said, not the most meta style of deck, but definitely something that like, oh, this actually could theoretically match up not horribly into like a slower like red blue style shark list. If you like kind of putts around or anything like that, you got to be careful, right? So kind of an interesting matchup there. Did end up winning it 2-1. Next, we ended up playing against an Amber Steel aggro list. This I went 3 games against and ended up winning because I won the die roll. Overall, I knew that they were on this list, so I knew that I had to mulligan for things like Goofy, specifically to get a like turn three or yep, turn three Goofy, and then find things like Maui and ride that to victory with Sisus and be prepared. My opponent, a little bit of a newer player, so I think they struggled with some of the things, the nuances of the deck, but also very difficult to overcome once you get behind on board for those Amber Steel style decks. I think overall, this style of deck is still has some of the problems that Steel Song has, but you can get past it because you're very aggressive. You know, things like Lady get down. You know, like you establish a board of like Daisy into a Smear Penny into Lady plus like Piglet or something, which they were playing. This list that I put together was not. Um, you could really run out these sort of red blue decks very quickly. But otherwise, if your start is maybe like, oh, you got to 10 lore but not 14 lore quick enough, then all of a sudden the red blue deck can take over. And that was kind of my experience against that matchup. Round three, I ended up getting paired into green yellow discard, which I wasn't sure if this would be a good or a bad matchup at the time. I had felt like there would be some degree of confidence, especially because, funny story, in game one, my opponent inked an Ursula Vanessa and said pass. And I didn't know that they were on discard, so I was like, oh, this is a Steel Song player. I'm about to like get a slam dunk, become 3-0, and get to just like draw into top it. They were playing this deck, on the other hand, and that actually changed things quite a bit and made it very difficult for me to win the game. So they had taken game two off of me and game three off of me. But I got game one because I just done a lot of like mana shark things and made it very difficult for them. Overall, though, I would say that blue red can be a little bit difficult at dealing with the hand disruption. You really have to establish a manner. That was kind of the one big thing that made me be able to take a game off of them was establish a manner and protect the manner. Playing against this style of deck, they were able to disrupt everything else. You know, like for example, you would think Shark gets to live quite a bit, but if he gets, we don't talk about Bruno'd, which Shark is kind of Bruno on site, you're in a rough spot. But you do have ways to combat the matchup by going with things like Sisu and Be Prepared, so you can definitely get through their stuff. It's an interesting dynamic, though, for sure. It's not like, I would say, I would lean it towards Shark if they have a manner. Otherwise, I would lean it towards Greed Yellow Discard. Just if we're just relying solely on characters. Overall, though, I thought this is a very fun and stimulating matchup. I did end up losing in 3 games, which is unfortunate, but definitely an interesting matchup to say the least. Finally, for this tournament, I did get paired against a green-yellow hyper aggro, which anybody who's played blue-red kind of knows is like the bane of your existence. You're like, you are the opponent that these decks get to just beat up and shove into a box. And unfortunately, I lost the die roll against green-yellow hyper aggro. My opponent, very kind person, did not know what my cards did not care that much about what my cards did. Just they knew they had a bunch of these here black symbols, and they knew that they could turn them sideways and get the lore, and they sure did. And I was just fighting for my life, trying to develop into like into a super goofy. Please, like how far I'll go into something good, and I just like kept getting bodied. So I wouldn't say that this is their list particularly, but same general idea. Gotta go fast, just full Sonic mode, right? Like we're not here to play long, grindy games. We are here to get 20 lore as fast as possible because that's what we know how to do. But very good on my opponent. They did end up making top 8, and I was very like happy for them because like they had seemed like a bit of a newer player. So good for them for being able to make it. Obviously, though, one of those moments where personally, you know, I spend a lot of time testing and thinking about this game. It's one of those moments where it's very humbling, right? Where you gotta be like, there's a beauty in that where you're like, okay, I just lost to somebody who had to read half my cards, but that's okay. That's how variance is supposed to go in card games. And like you could have a lot of skill expression sometimes, and sometimes you can just have times where the right play is just turn everything sideways and hope they don't have it. But like I said, good on my opponent there. I'm not as salty. Obviously, it's always funny when you have to kind of when your soul is crushed, but you have to conduct yourself like an adult, shake hands, and be like, "Hey, good job, good games." You know, very humbling experience and very good to have, in my opinion, actually. Um, Finally, just to go off on this red blue deck here, uh, you'll notice I said I did go 2-3 for this tournament. I did end up getting paired into my wife the final round, who had an unintentional draw. So she was 3-1-1, and I was 2-2. And ultimately, whether or not it's, some people are okay with this or not, I gave her that win because she was for sure going to get into top eight, whereas I was not. So, one of the biggest things that I can say about set champs in general is make sure that you remember kind of the extra game of that exists outside of the games with Disney Arcana when it comes to tournaments. It's not always the funnest. I know some people tend to complain about it, but you have to be able to pay attention to, all right, what does it look like for me? Should I play right now? Should I draw right now? Do I have to play right now? These are like the biggest things that you have to think about when you go into a tournament that are not just the matchups of Disney Arcana cards. That rant aside, this is the green, or not green, red. There's no green, red. This is red, blue, shark. I had a decent amount of fun playing this deck. I don't think I would go back to it necessarily. It seems like the times that you win um, are mostly actually mana based and not shark based, which, like, shark is kind of like a nuke, but they also have a nuke pointing at you. They always got to like pay attention to it. Something along those lines. I don't really know the analogy I'm using here, but I would say that this deck is very strong and has a lot of what I would call horsepower. Very powerful cards, very able to do a lot of different game actions and deal with a lot of different things. But overall, it's not the style of deck that I currently enjoy. I kind of liked blue red when you could play a Hiram when it was busted, because that always felt more straightforward. These feel a little bit more difficult for me personally. So you could say I'm a bad player, etc., if you want, I guess. But yeah, blue red, very fun deck for some, not so much for me. And finally, my most recent set champs, which was yesterday, I went 2-3 with green yellow discard. I wanted to give this deck a shot because, one, I always thought the play patterns of the deck were pretty interesting. I'd been testing it a little bit, and I've actually never registered a Diablo deck for a set champs, and I was like, well, he's rotating. I can't imagine there's any world where they reprint this card, right? He's going to Infinity format, so we'll give it a shot and see how it goes. Overall, this deck kind of falls victim to some matchup variance sometimes, but also it just there's kind of a lot of pieces that need to go right for things to go right. So like all the Diablo decks, when you first start playing them, are like, all right, I just need to land a Diablo and hope this thing sticks. And that was the first angle I had attacked it from a while ago. But now I've learned that there's other kind of starts that you want. Like, for example, my version was playing Ursula Vanessa, which I know some other versions are not. I like this card because I thought it would be really good to have Ursula into Ariel to have a quick under the sea turn. If you need to get rid of your opponent's board pretty quickly. But overall, this card, I don't know how I feel about it personally. Could see it going down in favor of something like Lewis, which I'll go over in a second here, but I actually played against in the mirror. All in all, this deck is still very fun to play, and it does make for a lot of interesting games against certain other decks, But there's something I'll talk about in the mirror in a second here, which I thought was pretty interesting about this deck. But long story short, this is what I played to start. The first deck I played against at this tournament, I went 2-0 against, which was a Steel Song style deck. very basic level, playing Cinderella. They were doing the Rhino shift line, which is kind of the new thing that you do in this set. Um, but they were on some amount of grab your swords, which I thought was interesting because that actually makes it significantly more difficult for something like Prince John to live overall. But I think they didn't have Pete's at the times that they needed to have Pete's, and I ended up taking 2 close games against them. Uh, this matchup seems kind of so-so, depending, especially if you're leaned really heavy into Diablo. These steel decks eat a Diablo right up, whereas you know, if they don't have the steel, or if you don't rely on Diablo, sometimes you can get away with Prince Johnning them to death, and then treating an Under the Sea like a Be Prepared, which can be very strong against them and take over the board as you do against these sort of board-based decks. Not a crazy amount to talk about here. Once again, did 2-0 this deck, but all of the matchups I can say were pretty fun with this deck into steel style decks. Next, I played actually against a friend of mine who I kind of knew what they were going to be on a little bit. They're playing blue-green items. Blue-green items, kind of a slam dunk matchup for the discard deck. Because you need so many things to go right and you have a long game, it's very difficult to kind of assemble all of your pieces all together in the right order and be able to keep them in your hand correctly. One of the biggest things too was having Diablo against him, and then him needing to use these Maurice's workshops that just ended up gaining me more card advantage against him. Uh, Only noteworthy cards that I played against that I thought were scary was Under the Sea. I had to dodge those quite a bit, and I did end up dodging them. My friend was actually very, very unlucky on both Oswald triggers and drawing Under the Seas out of a bunch of cards when he needed to. So it was actually a fairly easy 2-0 for my deck. I could see a world where you get Under the Sea a bunch of times, though, and you end up losing to this style of deck, but overall, I felt pretty confident going into that matchup and coming out of it. So I would say if there's, for some god awful reason, a lot of blue green items in your meta, you could definitely play green yellow discard and have a good time. The next matchup I faced was against Emerald Amethyst discard, and obviously this is my version, this isn't somebody else's version, but I did end up going 0-2 against this deck, and I don't love to be the guy who goes, oh, I was super unlucky every game, but I did play 2 aerials in one turn and then missed with them. And then in game 2, when I played the next aerial, I missed with that again. So sometimes aerial always just says rearrange the bottom 4 cards of your deck. You can take out this whole text line right here and just replace it with rearrange the bottom 4 cards of your deck. I don't know that the matchup would be horrible. Noteworthy, my opponent mentioned to me afterwards, he's like, I'm not playing any Iagos, which was kind of interesting because I did have 4 Paint the Roses red in my deck because I thought that that would be really strong tech for something like an Iago Giant Spectral Parrot here. I think we could have gone 3 games pretty easily if my deck had decided it wanted to draw Under the Sea at the correct time. There was one game where I had a very beautiful Under the Sea play lined up. My opponent played their second Ursula Deceiver and just sniped it out of my hand at the right time, which does happen, you know? We've all fallen victim to that person who either doesn't have the song when you Ursula them and then they draw it right after, or a perfectly timed Ursula, just based on some intuition, uh, will get you a whole game, which is what happened to me. Overall, I think the matchup could be about 50-50. I think I had some rough variance there. I don't know that I made that many questionable takes. Like I had one play where I sang with a Vanessa that I needed on board maybe, but I was really trying to dig for stuff because I sang like a Paint the Roses red or something like that, and then the Vanessa ended up dying to like a fox. Overall, though, I would say that the 0-2 here was just some rough variance, if we can be frank. I don't know that the matchup is that horrible. But I could see it being rough because you have some of the same problems as like against red purple, where they have genies, Elsas, sometimes Iagos, and Peter Pans to be able to just like constantly kill your Diablos. So it could be a very difficult matchup in that aspect, I assume. Maybe a more experienced green yellow player could say um, otherwise. So next, as I alluded to before, I played against the mirror. And one of the very interesting things I think about the green yellow discard mirror, because I had never played it before, um, but my friend who I was playing against was very well versed in it, obviously, is that despite this deck having very interesting and kind of complex gameplay against a lot, like every other deck you play against is like you have to cobble together these interesting board situations and balance between bouncing their things with the muses and like discarding, and then getting to the point where you could under the sea them. The mirror of this deck is, did you establish Diablo first, or did you under the sea at the perfect time? Both of those things are kind of the predictive factors for who will win, and then the game ends pretty quickly after because the deck does not reset its board well afterwards. Um, so, kind of funny enough was you would think that these games would be very, very long, but they actually weren't. We were one of the quickest matchups done because we had both just gone 3 games, either under the seeing or Diabloing each other, and then the other person just went, "Yep, I'm just dead because my whole board is gone." Um, Unfortunately, didn't go my way. Game 3, I had a pretty bad to mediocre hand, and my opponent ended up having a very strong Diablo and Prince John You Have Forgotten Me draw. There was just nothing I could do, especially after they under the seed me. I was trying to come back into it, and I was like, well, I could let this go on for 4 more turns, but I think we're just dead on board, which was the case because you don't have enough ink after a while because you basically the discard player learns the frustrating situations that come up from other discard players, right? Or being discarded all the time. Overall, though, uh, not my favorite mirror in the world to play, but it happened and ended up going 2-2 at that point. Finally, at 2-2, I decided to play the 5th round and see if we could bubble in. We played against Amber Steel Aggro. I ended up losing the die roll on this one. So game 1 was a bit of a wash. Game 2, I ended up cobbling things back together with my opponent being at 18 lore and being able to muses back their characters at the right time and then establish a board and just win from there. So, which is kind of what you do against aggro. You really need the muses and under the sea and different kinds of things to help control the board. Game 3 was very, very close. My opponent actually had a quite slow start, thankfully, but they just were able to eventually play a lady, play a bunch of characters, and get quite a bit of lore. And then I was drawing a lot of cards with a Diablo actually that just wasn't dying, thankfully, at the time. But he ended up drawing a lot of sort of vanilla type cards, you know, like Little Diablos, Ursulas, Aladdins, which is, I think, overarchingly one of my biggest issues with this deck is there is quite a bit of air when things are not going well, right? There's a lot of cards that just like, if you don't have your pieces that synergize with them, you're kind of looking at just like do nothing style cards, especially when you needed some cards. So with that game 3, I really wanted an under the sea effect or something to be able to handle his board and be able to get ahead. Didn't get there. Unfortunately, found out afterwards that we were basically playing for 9th place anyways, which does happen when you are 2-2 out of 5 rounds, you know? Sometimes you're going to be playing for that 9th place spot, but you got to give it a shot sometimes. You know, worst case scenario, you get some extra practice in, get some more games in, just try to improve there. Uh, Overarching thoughts on this whole deck. I do think it's got some fun gameplay patterns. Not something I think I would bring again anytime soon. Leans a little heavy on Diablo sometimes, and Diablo is just surprisingly killable right now between Peter Pan, Brawl, um, and then all of the steel removal, this guy just doesn't get to live as much as he used to. So like he went from being like a bannable card to like you're just a pedestrian bird. I mean, don't get me wrong, this card can still like easily win you the game in some matchups, but that was kind of noteworthy to me is just how fragile this card can actually be, especially if you're not running Hidden Cove, which I wasn't. Um, Overall though, fun gameplay experience to a certain extent. Uh, Obviously wanted to get top 8 and didn't, so it happens to the best of us. Overall, I could still recommend this style of deck to somebody who's looking for this kind of play style. So that was my set champs experience so far. I think I'm going to end up playing about 2 or 3 more over the course of what's left of set champs, which I think we've got about 3 weeks left. We're traveling one weekend, so we're not going to be able to play at all. But I think that 2 or 3 more is about likely where I'm going to be at. So, just to kind of cap off this video, because it's going a little bit long, what do I think of the current meta? I think the current meta is very much so wide open. And I think that in a lot of people's eyes can definitely be like very good because the diverse meta is very strong for a lot of people. Like in a lot of people's eyes, if you ask them what's the perfect TCG meta, they're gonna say diverse. No one perfect deck. I like the idea of like a deck that is good and then decks that can beat it personally. Right now with such a wide open meta, it can be very frustrating where we are at right now because you can win with a lot of things, but the problem is it does feel a little bit high rolly, which I was kind of talking with one of my friends about. Like decks that like if you're not prepared for a Diablo and they hit a Diablo, you're just dead. If you have turn one Cindy Storm, probably just dead, right? If you have the ability to ramp into a manner plus be prepared, etc., or Sisu, probably just dead. Like there's a lot of diversity, but there's also a lot of high rolling and a lot of games that kind of feel like non games, sort of. It's not as bad as I've seen in other games. It's just there's a lot of variance that can hit you. Overall, though, I've been in a difficult position through some of these set champs because I am used to doing quite a bit better. I got quite a few set champs promos from all the ones I've been at. So missing out on these ones, the last 3, has been a little bit disheartening. But you just got to keep pushing through and just remind yourself like you are playing a card game. Things happen. There are more chances to play later and do well later. Overall, though, I would say we'll see. I got some other decks that I plan on playing for set champs. I'll probably go back to Ruby Amethyst. That's the only one that I can guarantee that I'm probably going to touch again is Ruby Amethyst because I love that deck and I always feel very confident playing it. But that's the video for today. Hope you guys liked it. Thank you very much.